Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can create your very own infinity scarf using your knitting machine. I am of course using my Sentro knitting machine, but you can use this exact same technique on any machine. So to get started, what you're going to need is of course some yarn. Now I have mentioned this in my previous videos. I prefer to use a DK weight or an Aran weight yarn purely because that's what I find works best in my machine. You may find something else works best for you, but this is just what works best for me and in my machine. So today I'm going to be using the 4 Seasons Stallion 8-ply 100% acrylic yarn. This is a DK weight / 8-ply yarn, and it is quite soft, although I must admit it is not the best quality, but I've had this in my stash for ages, so I thought why not just get it out today and use it for this video. It does actually work really well in the knitting machine as well. So look, it's not the best quality, but the knitting machine seems to really like it. So that's what I'm going to be using today, but of course you can use any yarn that you like. So the scarf I'm making today requires about 200 grams of this yarn. You may require less or more, just depending on the length that you want to make your scarf. But for the exact same one that I'm making today, you will need about 200 grams. We're then just going to need, of course, some scissors, a yarn needle, and we're also going to be using some waste yarn. If you haven't heard of the waste yarn concept before, don't stress, I'm going to explain it in a moment. But you are going to need some waste yarn that is in a contrasting color to the yarn you're using for your scarf. So as you can see, 2 very different colors. You will need enough waste yarn to do approximately 20 rows on your knitting machine. So this should be enough, but just grab whatever you can. All right, so we're going to be starting off with our waste yarn. So just find the end. And we are going to be casting on using our waste yarn. I'm not going to take you guys through how to cast on. I assume you already know how to. If you don't, I will link the cast on video on my channel above so you can go and check it out before we get started. So I'm just going to cast on using my waste yarn. Once you have finished casting on, you can just pop your yarn into the yarn guide and through your tension gauge. For a DK weight yarn, I usually just use the medium tension setting, but you use what works best for you. We're then just going to crank out about 10 rows using our waste yarn. The reason we are starting with waste yarn is purely because it just makes it so much easier to join your ends together once we've finished our scarf. So because it's a contrasting color to what we're using for our scarf, you'll see at the end what I mean when we're joining our ends together, but it just makes it a lot easier to be able to see the stitches, to be able to join our scarf at the end. It also gives it a much nicer finish. So if you've used your knitting machine before, you will probably notice that the first few rows of work are usually quite messy and loose, and that's just the nature of the knitting machine. You're not doing anything wrong. That's just how the first few rows turn out. So the purpose of the waste yarn is to use the waste yarn to create your first few rows. I usually do about 10, and then you start with the color that you're going to be using for your project, and this allows you to get rid of those scrappy, untidy rows at the beginning of your work once you're done. So I will obviously explain it as we go and as we get to the next step, but it does serve a purpose, I promise. Okay, so I have just cranked out 10 rows using my waste yarn. I'm now going to remove this from the tension gauge and I'm going to cut this off, leaving a fairly decent end just so it doesn't unravel. And we are then going to join in our color that we're using for our scarf. So finding the end of that skein, we want to leave an end that we can use to sew the ends together once we've finished our scarf. So you want to leave a good amount, I want to say about 20 inches or so, just to be safe, and pop that into the middle of your machine. Then inserting our yarn into our yarn guide and into our tension gauge. We're then going in and looping that new working yarn in under the next hook. And I've just cranked my handle until that next pin is next to the yarn guide. So that should be pin number 1. Once you've done that, you can insert that into your yarn guide there and then in through your tension gauge. And then we just continue cranking as normal. I'm just going to reset my row counter here so I can keep track of how many rows I have completed. I'm not exactly sure how many rows I will complete for this scarf. I'm kind of just playing it by ear, so I will definitely let you guys know how many rows I end up doing. But for now, I'm just going to start cranking and we'll see how we go. I recommend going slow for the first few rounds after changing your color, because your stitches where you've just joined in your yarn will probably be a little bit loose. So just take it easy. And you are basically just going to continue cranking until your scarf has reached your desired length. As I said, I'm just playing this by ear, but I will definitely let you guys know how many rows I end up doing once I'm done. So go ahead, continue cranking, and I will meet you right back here at the end. All right, guys, here we are at the end of our rounds. I ended up going with 195 rounds. You can change this to suit whether you would like your scarf shorter or longer, but I've gone with 195. I was aiming for 200, but I've only got this much yarn left of the skein that I was using, and to save me joining in another one, I've just decided to stop at 195. So now what we're going to do is finish off with our waste yarn. So we're just going to take our current working yarn out of the yarn guide and out of our tension gauge, and we're just going to pop it in the middle there. And then we're going to take our waste yarn once again. So just going in under that next pin, so that white pin signifies the last pin of the round. So we're going in under pin number 1 and just popping that end into there. And we're then just going to wind a tiny little bit just so it's to the right of our yarn guide, and we're then just popping our yarn into our yarn guide and into our tension gauge. Okay, so now we can go ahead and reset our stitch counter, our row counter to 0, because we're now just going to complete 10 rows, or 10 rounds I should say, of our waste yarn. Alright guys, so we are now here at the end of our 10 waste yarn rounds. We are now going to remove our waste yarn from our yarn guide and our tension gauge, and we're just going to pop it in the middle there. So the next step is the cast off. So when you're casting off with waste yarn, it's super duper easy. You don't have to go in and pick up any stitches off the loom or anything like that. All you're going to do is crank your handle. You're going to want to go around at least a couple of times, and you will notice that it will just start to pop right off, just like that. And this is why we love using waste yarn. So now that it is off our knitting machine, I'm just going to move this to the side. And now we can move on to the next step. So I'm just going to untwist this and pray that this is long enough. I think it will be. Okay, so once it's off the loom, I like to just go in and stretch it out, because it's been so stretched out on the knitting machine that your stitches will look a bit loose. But never fear, if you just go in and do these ones, you will notice that all the stitches will condense and it looks nice and neat like this. So what our next step is to go in and join our ends together so we don't have a big hole here. So what I'm going to do is lay this out flat because you want to make sure there's no twists and that everything is nice and straight. And then what we're going to do is close up this hole here. So you'll see that because we were using the tubular setting on our knitting machine, obviously it is a tube, we want to close up this end so it's no longer got a hole in it. So to do that, what we want to first make sure is that our yarn that we left at the beginning, remember I told you guys to leave an end for sewing, make sure that is on the edge, so the very corner of your tube. We then are going to take our yarn needle and thread that yarn through that. And then what we're going to do is go in and pick up all these stitches. So as you can see, because we've used waste yarn, it makes it really, really easy to see the stitches that we need to go in and pick up. So obviously our scarf is the tan color, so we're going to want to go in and pick up all those tan colored stitches. So first up, you want to find the corner of your work. I find holding it like this makes it really easy because we're going to be joining this side of stitches to this side of stitches. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Okay, so let's do it. What we're doing is first of all finding that first stitch. I've got that first stitch there, and I'm then going in under the stitch directly opposite it. Again, finding the next stitch and going in under the stitch directly opposite that stitch. Again, for the next one, finding that stitch and going into that next one. We're basically just whip stitching both sides together. And we are just repeating that process all the way along until that whole edge has been joined together. I'll show you guys a couple more and then I will go ahead and finish it off and I'll meet you back at the end. But just showing you a couple more. So in one stitch, in through the one directly opposite. And again, just repeating that all the way until you get to the end of your edge. Once you've finished picking up all your stitches and sewing your end together, you'll notice that there's no longer a hole in the end. It should look something like this. If it doesn't look absolutely perfect, please don't stress. As long as all your stitches have been picked up, that is the absolute main thing. You won't really be able to see this edge once we're done anyway. So I'm not gonna cut off this yarn. I've got quite a bit left over. I'm going to leave it attached. We will use it later. So please leave that yarn that you just used to join your end together attached. We are going to use it later. Once all the stitches have been picked up, we are then free to go in and remove our waste yarn. So all you're going to do is, however works for you, it should just pull undone quite easily, as you can see from what I'm doing. But if not, please feel free to go in and cut it out if that's easier for you. I prefer not to cut it out because I reuse my waste yarn and it just saves wasting yarn unnecessarily. But again, if you got all tangled up or something and you couldn't get it out, please feel free to cut it. Just make sure you don't cut your actual scarf. Alrighty, once you have removed your waste yarn, you should be left with an edge that looks something like this. Again, if it's not absolutely perfect, please don't worry, you won't be able to see it once we're finished. You may wish to just pull this end of yarn to tighten it up a little bit, just to tidy it up. And we're then going to repeat that exact same process with the other end of our scarf. Once you've done that, I will meet you back here for the next step. What we're going to do now is secure this edge. So you'll see that if I was to pull this, it kind of gathers the end of our scarf, which we don't want. All we want is to just secure that part, so then when we pull it, it's not going to cinch the end of our scarf. So how we go about doing that is just thread that yarn onto your yarn needle. You could definitely also do this with a crochet hook, but I'm refraining from using a crochet hook in this tutorial because I completely understand that not everyone crochets or has access to a crochet hook. So I'm just going in with a needle for this tutorial. What we're going to do is just take our needle and go in through there, and then just going back in through that loop there and pulling it tight to secure that edge off. So now you'll notice that if I was to pull that, it doesn't cinch our scarf anymore. I'm going to go and complete that exact same step on the other end of our scarf. Once you've secured that yarn, what we're going to do is lay our scarf out flat. And because I'm making this an infinity scarf, we want to join the two ends together. If you just wanted to make a normal scarf and you didn't want this to be an infinity scarf, that is totally fine. All you would do is finish this off here, sew in your ends, and you could add, you know, some tassels or something to the end if you liked, or you could just leave it as is. But I am making an infinity scarf today, so I'm going to join our two ends together to make a loop. So to do that, all you do, lay your scarf out flat, make sure there's no twists in your work, and we're then going to take one of those ends that we left and we're going to sew along the edge to join it together. We're then taking the yarn we're using to attach our ends and popping that onto our yarn needle. And then all we're going to do is hold our ends on top of each other like this. And we are working through the ends to join them together. Again, just using the whip stitch. If you have a different stitch that you would prefer, by all means, feel free to use that. If you would like to do this with a crochet hook and crochet your ends together, by all means, please do that. Again, I have chosen not to use my crochet hook in this tutorial purely because I understand that not everyone that is watching this video is probably a crocheter. So I thought I would show you guys how to do it in a way that is suitable for everyone. But again, if you would prefer to crochet your ends together, by all means, please feel free to do so. So we're basically just whip stitching all the way along the edge of our scarf to join both sides together. And don't worry if your seam is a little bit untidy, because that is going to be on the inside of our scarf. Just making sure the ends are nice and even so you don't end up attaching them unevenly. And I'm just going to continue doing this all the way until we've reached the end of this edge, and I will meet you back here. So here we are at the end of our edge, just finishing off that last stitch there. And now what I'm going to do is secure this end, so obviously it doesn't come undone, using that exact same technique that we did before. So just going in and then back through, pulling it tight, and I like to go in and do it again just to make sure it is super duper secure. Pulling that tight, I'm now just going to trim up this end because it is ridiculously long. I definitely overestimated how much I would need. So now all I'm going to do is go back in and sew in our ends, and then I'm going to show you what the finished product looks like. Okay guys, this is now our finished product. I've finished sewing in all my ends. Now what I'm going to do is turn this in the other way, so we've got our nice neat seam showing on the outside. And this is what we are left with. I think this is a great size because you could wear it by itself just like that without it being looped over, or if you wanted it to be more like a cowl, you could double it over and wear it as a cowl. So I absolutely love this project. It is a great project for winter. It worked up super duper quickly. It probably took me all up maybe just over an hour. So a great project if you are looking for something to make this winter on your knitting machine. I ended up using just under 2 skeins of this yarn, so I'm quite happy with that. So it's a great stash busting project if you've got a bit of DK weight yarn lying around and you wanted to get rid of it like I did. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, as always, please remember to give me a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and turn on your notifications so you will be notified of all my future videos. Until next time, I will see you later. Stay safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time. Thanks guys, bye!